The hum of machinery and the soft glow of welding torches filled Workshop Bay 7 of the Celestial Haven Research Station, creating an atmosphere that Marcus Reed found oddly comforting. After 3 years of working in the depths of space, tools hung in organized chaos along the walls, each magnetic clamp holding instruments designed for repairs on technology. From dozens of different worlds, the air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the metallic scents and exotic fumes that came with maintaining equipment built by species with vastly different atmospheric preferences. Marcus wiped his hands on his work apron, leaving streaks of lubricant that had long since become permanent fixtures on the worn fabric. At 28, he had developed the kind of practical competence that came from years of figuring out how to make alien technology work alongside human engineering, often without proper manuals or compatible parts. His workshop had become something of a neutral ground where researchers from various species brought their broken equipment, knowing that the human mechanic would find a way to fix things that shouldn't technically be fixable. The morning had been typical until Zara Moonwisp arrived with her portable plant analysis device, a sleek piece of Corellian biotechnology that looked more like a piece of modern art than scientific equipment. The device was roughly the size of a briefcase, with a surface that seemed to shift between deep green and silver. Depending on the angle of observation, organic-looking conduits ran along its edges, pulsing with a soft bioluminescent glow that indicated the internal systems were still functioning, though clearly not properly. Zara herself was unlike any of the other researchers who frequented his workshop, standing about 6 feet tall with the characteristic pale blue skin of her species. She moved with a fluid grace that reminded Marcus of water flowing over smooth stones. Her hair fell in waves of deep purple that seemed to contain flecks of actual starlight, and her large violet eyes held an intelligence that made him feel slightly self-conscious about his grease-stained work clothes and permanently dirty fingernails. "The molecular scanners are giving inconsistent readings," she explained in her melodic accent, setting the device carefully on his workbench. "Yesterday, it was analyzing plant cellular structures perfectly, but this morning it seems to think everything I scan is some variety of crystalline mineral." Marcus nodded, already reaching for his diagnostic tools. "Corellian biotech can be tricky. Your people build everything to work in harmony with natural biological processes, which means when something goes wrong, it tends to confuse fundamental categories rather than just stop working entirely." "Exactly," Zara said, her face brightening with appreciation for his understanding. "Most repair technicians try to approach our technology like mechanical devices, but they're really more like living systems that happen to perform technological functions." As Marcus began his examination of the device, he found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence beside him. She had pulled up a stool to watch him work, asking intelligent questions about his diagnostic process and offering insights into how the device was supposed to function. Her knowledge of both the technical specifications and the underlying biological principles was impressive, and Marcus discovered that explaining his repair approach to someone who genuinely understood the complexities involved made the work more engaging than usual. "The problem seems to be in the sensory interface matrix," he said after 20 minutes of careful probing with specialized instruments. "The biological components that translate molecular information into data formats are somehow cross-referencing with the mineral analysis subroutines." "Can you recalibrate the interface pathways?" Zara asked, leaning closer to examine the exposed internal components. "I think so, but it's going to require some creative rewiring," Marcus replied, becoming absorbed in the technical challenge. "Your people design these things to be self-maintaining, which is brilliant for normal operations, but makes manual intervention complicated." For the next hour, they worked together in comfortable collaboration. Zara's knowledge of Corellian biotechnology complemented Marcus's practical repair experience, and they developed an almost intuitive rhythm of problem-solving. She would identify which biological functions were being disrupted, while he figured out how to physically adjust the device's internal configurations to restore proper operation. "Try the molecular skin function now," Marcus said, making a final adjustment to a cluster of fiber optic biological conduits. that looked like luminescent plant roots. Zara activated the device and aimed it at a small flowering plant she'd brought. As a test subject, the scanner hummed softly, its bioluminescent patterns shifting through a complex sequence of colors. Before settling into a steady blue-green glow, the display screen filled with detailed molecular analysis data, showing cellular structures and chemical compositions with crystalline clarity. "Perfect," Zara exclaimed, her violet eyes sparkling with delight. "The readings are even more precise than before you started working on it." Marcus felt a warm sense of satisfaction. At her obvious pleasure with the repair, there was something particularly rewarding about successfully fixing equipment for someone who truly appreciated both the technical complexity involved and the practical importance of having properly functioning tools. "I think I actually improved the calibration while I was rewiring the interface matrix," he said, still studying the scanner's output data. "The molecular resolution is definitely higher than the original specifications." "How did you know to make those modifications?" Zara asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Experience with cross-species technology integration," Marcus replied, beginning to clean up his tools. "After you've worked on enough devices that combine biological and mechanical systems, you start to see patterns in how different technologies can be optimized." As he organized his equipment, Marcus found himself stealing glances at Zara, who was conducting additional tests on her newly repaired scanner. The afternoon light from the workshop's observation windows caught the subtle iridescence in her hair, and her expression of focused concentration as she worked was oddly captivating. There was something about her combination of scientific competence and gentle demeanor that he found increasingly attractive. "This is remarkable work," Zara said, looking up from her device. "I should probably return to my laboratory, but I wanted to thank you properly for taking so much time and care with the repair." "It was my pleasure," Marcus said, realizing as he spoke that it genuinely had been one of the more enjoyable repairs he'd undertaken recently. "Feel free to bring any other equipment problems my way. I enjoy working on Corellian biotechnology." Zara smiled, an expression that transformed her already attractive features into something that made Marcus momentarily forget what he'd been planning to say next. As she carefully packed her scanner into its protective carrying case, he found himself wishing their collaboration didn't have to end quite so soon. "Actually," he said, an idea occurring to him, "if you're interested in optimizing any of your other research equipment, I'd be happy to take a look. Sometimes devices that are working properly can still benefit from minor modifications to improve efficiency or accuracy." "That's very thoughtful of you," Zara replied, her tone suggesting genuine appreciation for the offer. "I do have several other pieces of equipment that could probably benefit from your expertise." As she prepared to leave, Marcus realized he was looking forward to her return visits more than was probably professionally appropriate. There was something about her combination of intelligence, kindness, and exotic beauty that made him want to find excuses to spend more time in her company. "Here you go, gorgeous," he said absently, handing her the carrying case without thinking about his choice of words. The moment the endearment left his lips, Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment. The workshop seemed to go completely silent, except for the background hum of machinery, and he could feel Zara's surprise like a physical presence in the air between them. Zara went completely still, her violet eyes widening as she stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Her pale blue skin began to shift to a deeper shade, almost purple, in what he was beginning to suspect might be the Corellian equivalent of blushing. "What did you just call me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest as he realized he'd just made what was probably a significant cultural mistake. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be inappropriate. It just slipped out. Sometimes I forget that casual endearments might not translate properly across species." But Zara wasn't looking offended. Instead, her expression was shifting to something that looked almost like wonder, mixed with a kind of shy pleasure that made his apology trail off into uncertain silence. "Say that again," she whispered, stepping closer to him with an intensity that made his heart rate accelerate noticeably. Marcus swallowed hard. suddenly aware that whatever was happening between them had moved well beyond the realm of professional equipment repair. "Gorgeous," he said softly, watching as her skin deepened to an even richer purple and her eyes seemed to brighten with some emotion he didn't quite understand, but definitely wanted to explore further. The workshop around them faded into background noise as they stood looking at each other, both seeming to realize that their relationship had just shifted into entirely new territory, though neither was quite sure what that territory might hold. Part 2. The library encountered. The ancient archives section of the Cosmic Library existed in perpetual twilight, its vast corridors lined with data storage systems that held the collected knowledge of 100 civilizations. Holographic displays floated at regular intervals, their soft blue glow providing just enough illumination to navigate between towering shelves that stretched up into shadowy heights. The air carried the faint scent of ozone and preserved parchment, a combination that somehow managed to smell both futuristic and timelessly scholarly. Finn Carter had always found the late-night hours in the archives to be his most productive time for research. At 31, he had spent the better part of a decade working as a xenolinguistics specialist, helping to catalog and translate documents from species whose languages had been lost to time or political upheaval. The quiet solitude of the archives, after standard operating hours, allowed him to focus on the complex patterns and subtle nuances that made ancient languages so fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. Tonight, he was working on a particularly challenging set of texts from the extinct Valorian civilization, whose written language seemed to shift meaning based on astronomical alignments that had occurred thousands of years ago. The translations required cross-referencing star charts with linguistic patterns, a process that demanded the kind of sustained concentration that was impossible during the library's busy daytime hours. He was deep in analysis of a particularly complex passage when he became aware of soft footsteps approaching through the archives. Finn looked up from his holographic workspace to see a figure moving gracefully between the shelves. Her attention focused on the data displays that indicated the locations of various document collections. Nyx Starweaver was immediately recognizable. Even in the dim lighting of the archives, her species, the ethereal, were known for their almost impossibly elegant appearance and their natural affinity for scholarly pursuits. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with pale silver skin that seemed to have its own subtle luminescence. Her hair fell in cascading waves of deep indigo, and her large amber eyes held the kind of ancient wisdom that made her appear far older than her actual years. Though Finn had never been entirely sure how aging worked for her species. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work," Nyx said as she approached his research station, her voice carrying the musical quality that characterized ethereal speech. "I was told that someone was working on Valorian translations, and I wanted to see if you might be interested in collaboration." Finn felt his pulse quicken slightly at her proximity. He had encountered Nyx several times during his years at the library, always in professional contexts, but their interactions had been limited to brief consultations about linguistic theory or archival procedures. Tonight was the first time they had been alone together in the quiet intimacy of the after hours. "Archives not disturbing at all," he replied, gesturing to the holographic displays surrounding his workspace. "I'm actually struggling with some passages that reference stellar phenomena. Your people's historical records might contain information that could help clarify the astronomical references." Nyx moved closer to examine his work, her amber eyes scanning the floating text with obvious interest. "Valorian temporal linguistics," she said appreciatively. "You're attempting to decode meaning structures that change based on celestial positioning. That's extraordinarily complex work, complex and frequently maddening," Finn admitted. The Valorians seemed to believe that the meaning of words could be influenced by the position of stars and planets at the time of writing. "It makes translation an exercise in historical astronomy as much as linguistics." "May I?" Nyx asked, indicating the control interface for his holographic displays. Finn nodded, watching as she manipulated the controls with fluid precision. The text displays reorganized themselves into new patterns, with additional data streams showing astronomical calculations and stellar position charts from the relevant time periods. The key to understanding Valorian temporal linguistics, Nix explained, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface, is recognizing that they didn't see language as separate from the physical universe. For them, words were living things that existed in harmony with cosmic forces. As she worked, Finn found himself increasingly captivated by both her intellectual approach to the problem and her physical presence beside him. The ethereal moved with a kind of unconscious grace that made even simple gestures seem like carefully choreographed dance movements. Her proximity filled the air around them with a subtle fragrance that reminded him of night-blooming flowers and distant starlight. "Look at this passage," Nick said, highlighting a section of Valorian text that had been particularly troublesome if you factor in the position of their primary star during the season when this was written. The grammatical structures align with ceremonial language patterns. Rather than everyday communication, Finn leaned closer to study her analysis, becoming acutely aware of the way her hair caught the light from the holographic displays. "You're right," he said, excitement growing as the previously incomprehensible text began to make sense. "This isn't a historical record at all. It's some kind of ritual invocation." "Exactly," Nick said, her amber eyes brightening with shared intellectual excitement. The Valorians used their temporal linguistic system for religious ceremonies that were timed to coincide with specific astronomical events. For the next 2 hours, they worked together in increasingly comfortable collaboration. Nix's knowledge of ancient astronomical records, combined with Finn's expertise in linguistic analysis to unlock passage after passage of previously untranslatable text, they developed a natural rhythm of discovery, with each breakthrough leading to new questions and deeper understanding of the Valorian civilization. "This is remarkable," Finn said as they successfully decoded what appeared to be a complete ceremonial calendar. "We've accomplished more tonight than I managed in 3 weeks of working alone." Collaborative research often produces results that exceed what individuals can achieve separately, Nix replied, though there was something in her tone that suggested she was referring to more than just academic productivity. As they continued their work, Finn became increasingly aware of the growing intimacy of their shared research. The quiet of the archives, the soft glow of the holographic displays, and the intellectual excitement of their discoveries had created an atmosphere that felt both professional and deeply personal. He found himself stealing glances at Nix's profile as she concentrated on the ancient texts, admiring the elegant lines of her features and the way her expressions shifted with each new insight. "There's something I've been curious about," Finn said during a brief pause in their translation work. "Your people's name, Starweaver, is it literal or metaphorical?" Nix smiled, an expression that seemed to illuminate her already luminescent features. "Both, in a way. My family line has traditionally served as celestial navigators and cosmic archivists. We weave star charts and astronomical data into navigational patterns that other species can use for space travel." "That's beautiful," Finn said, genuinely impressed by the poetic nature of her professional heritage. "It must give you a unique perspective on how different civilizations relate to the cosmos." "It does," Nix agreed. "Every species approaches the universe differently, but there are underlying patterns that connect all forms of consciousness to the cosmic forces around them." The Valorians understood this intuitively, which is why their language reflects astronomical influences. As they returned to their translation work, Finn found himself increasingly drawn to both Nix's intellectual capabilities and her gentle, thoughtful personality. The combination of scholarly brilliance and natural grace was unlike anything he had encountered in his years of academic work. "I think we've successfully decoded the entire ceremonial sequence," Nix said finally, stepping back to admire their completed translation work. The holographic displays now showed a complete Valorian religious calendar, with ceremonies timed to coincide with various stellar alignments and planetary conjunctions. "We make an excellent research team," Finn said, beginning to save their work to the library's permanent archives. "I hope we can collaborate on other projects in the future." "I would enjoy that very much," Nix replied, and there was something in her amber eyes that suggested she was looking forward to more than just academic collaboration. As she prepared to leave, gathering her own research materials and preparing to return them to their proper archive locations, Finn felt a reluctance to see their evening of shared discovery come to an end. "Thank you for your help with the Valorian translations," he said, handing her a data pad containing copies of their completed work. "Here you go, beautiful." The endearment slipped out without conscious thought, a natural expression of his growing appreciation for both her intellectual contributions and her captivating presence. The moment the word left his lips, however, Finn felt a jolt of awareness at what he had just said. Nyx went completely still, her amber eyes widening as she stared at him with an expression of profound surprise. Her already luminescent skin seemed to brighten noticeably, taking on a soft golden glow that made her appear even more ethereal than usual. "What did you call me?" she asked, her musical voice carrying a note of wonder that made Finn's heart skip several beats. I called you beautiful," Finn stammered, suddenly uncertain whether he had just committed a serious cultural transgression. "I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. I didn't mean to overstep any boundaries." But Nyx wasn't looking offended. Instead, her expression was shifting to something that looked like amazed delight, mixed with a kind of emotional vulnerability that made Finn realize their relationship had just moved into entirely uncharted territory in ethereal culture. She said softly, her voice barely audible above the quiet hum of the archive systems. "Words of aesthetic appreciation are considered deeply personal expressions. To call someone beautiful is to acknowledge a connection that goes beyond mere physical appearance." Finn felt his mouth go dry as he began to understand the significance of what had just happened between them. "And how do you feel about that kind of connection?" Nyx stepped closer to him, her golden glow becoming more pronounced and her amber eyes holding his gaze with an intensity that made the rest of the archives fade into irrelevance. "Say that again," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and anticipation that made Finn's pulse race with possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. "Beautiful," he said softly, watching as her luminescence brightened further and her expression filled with the kind of joy that suggested their evening of collaborative research had become something far more significant than either of them had originally planned. The Nebula Cafe occupied a prime location on Deck 12 of the Orbital Research Station, its large transparent aluminum windows offering a spectacular view of the swirling cosmic phenomena that gave the establishment its name. During the day cycle, researchers from dozens of species gathered at its eclectic collection of tables and seating arrangements, each designed to accommodate different physiological requirements and social customs. The air was filled with the aromatic complexity of beverages and foods from across the galaxy, creating an olfactory symphony that somehow managed to be both exotic and comforting. Oliver Hayes had been working as the cafe's primary barista for nearly 2 years, long enough to memorize the preferences of regular customers and to develop an intuitive understanding of how different species liked their beverages prepared. At 26, he had originally taken the job as a temporary assignment while waiting for a position in the station's botanical research division, but he had discovered an unexpected satisfaction in the craft of creating perfect drinks for beings whose taste preferences ranged from the sublime to the utterly alien. The morning rush had been particularly intense, with 3 research conferences running simultaneously, and what seemed like half the station's population requiring caffeine, or its various species-specific equivalents. Oliver had been moving in the focused rhythm that came with experience, his hands automatically preparing complex beverage orders, while his mind tracked the dozen different brewing processes happening simultaneously behind the counter. It was during a brief lull in the morning chaos that Luna Silvermist made her daily appearance. She was immediately recognizable even in a crowd of diverse alien researchers, her species' characteristic pale green skin seeming to shift through subtle variations of hue depending on her emotional state and the lighting conditions. Her hair was a cascade of silver that moved like liquid metal, and her large violet eyes held the kind of artistic sensitivity that made her seem to perceive colors and patterns that were invisible to other beings. Luna was one of the station's most renowned xeno artists, specializing in creating visual works that could be appreciated across species barriers. Despite vastly different optical capabilities and aesthetic preferences, her reputation had spread throughout the sector, with collectors and museums competing to acquire pieces that somehow managed to evoke emotional responses in beings whose neurological structures should have made such cross-cultural artistic communication impossible. "Good morning, Luna," Oliver said as she approached the counter, already beginning to prepare her usual order without waiting for her to speak. "The usual cosmic latte with stardust foam art, actually," Luna said, her musical voice carrying the characteristic harmonic undertones that made her species speech so pleasant to hear. "I was hoping you might be willing to try something experimental today. I've been working on a series of pieces inspired by flavor combinations, and I'd like to experience something completely new." Oliver paused in his preparation of her regular drink. Intrigued by the request, Luna's artistic process often involved seeking inspiration from unexpected sources, and he had learned that her requests for experimental beverages usually led to interesting challenges that pushed his skills in creative directions. "Any particular flavor profiles you're interested in exploring?" he asked, studying the extensive collection of ingredients and preparation methods available behind the counter. "Sweet, bitter, complex, simple, something that tells a story," Luna said, her eyes brightening with artistic enthusiasm. "I want to taste something that has layers of meaning, flavors that reveal themselves in sequence rather than all at once." Oliver considered the challenge, his mind automatically cataloging ingredients and preparation techniques that might achieve the kind of complex sensory experience Luna was describing. After a moment of contemplation, he began gathering materials for what was essentially going to be an improvised flavor composition. "I'm thinking a base of Terran chocolate with Corallian flower essences," he said, beginning to heat milk in a specialized steamer designed for multiple species' digestive requirements, layered with vegan spice harmonics and finished with crystallized nebula honey from the outer rim. Luna watched with obvious fascination as he worked, her artistic eye clearly appreciating the precise movements and careful timing that went into creating complex beverages. "The way you combine ingredients reminds me of color mixing," she observed. "Each component changes the others, creating results that are greater than the sum of their parts." "Exactly," Oliver agreed, carefully layering different flavor elements to create what he hoped would be the kind of sequential taste experience Luna was seeking. "Good barista work is definitely an art form, even if most people think of it as just service industry labor." As he completed the drink's preparation, Oliver found himself taking extra care with the presentation. Luna's appreciation for visual aesthetics meant that the beverage's appearance would be almost as important as its taste, so he spent additional time creating foam art that complemented the drink's complex flavor profile. "This is beautiful," Luna said as he presented the finished beverage, her eyes studying the intricate patterns he had created in the foam. "The visual composition has the same kind of layered complexity you described in the flavors. I hope it lives up to your expectations," Oliver said, genuinely curious about her reaction to his improvised creation. Luna lifted the cup carefully, inhaling the aromatic steam. Before taking her first tentative sip, her expression immediately shifted to one of delighted surprise, her pale green skin taking on a warmer tone that Oliver was learning to associate with her positive emotional states. "This is extraordinary," she said, taking another sip and pausing to analyze the flavor progression. The initial sweetness gives way to floral notes, then spice complexity, and finally a crystalline finish that somehow ties everything together. "It's like tasting a complete narrative." Oliver felt a warm sense of pride at her obvious pleasure with his creation. There was something particularly satisfying about successfully creating something that could inspire an artist whose work he genuinely admired. "I'm glad it worked," he said, beginning to clean up his preparation area while keeping an eye on Luna's continued appreciation of the beverage. Sometimes experimental combinations can be complete disasters. "This is definitely not a disaster," Luna said, settling into her preferred seat near the large observation windows. "In fact, I think this drink might be the inspiration I've been looking for. The way the flavors interact and transform reminds me of some concepts I've been exploring in my visual work. As the morning progressed, Oliver found himself stealing glances at Luna as she sketched in her artistic journal between sips of her experimental latte. Her concentration was complete and graceful, her silver hair catching the light from the nebula outside the windows. As her hands moved across the pages with fluid precision, during a brief break in customer traffic, Oliver approached her table with a fresh carafe of the beverage base, thinking she might want a refill of the experimental drink. "How's the artistic inspiration working out?" he asked, noting the complex sketches and color notes that filled several pages of her journal. "Wonderfully," Luna replied, looking up from her work with eyes that sparkled with creative excitement. "The flavor progression you created has given me ideas for a whole new series of pieces. The way taste can tell stories has made me think about how visual art might create similar sequential experiences. I'd love to see the finished pieces when you complete them," Oliver said, genuinely interested in how his beverage creation might translate into visual art. "I'll make sure you get to see them first," Luna promised, her tone suggesting that his opinion of her work mattered to her in ways that went beyond professional courtesy. As Oliver returned to his position behind the counter, he realized that his interaction with Luna had become something he looked forward to each day. Her combination of artistic brilliance and gentle personality made their brief conversations a highlight of his work routine, and he had begun to find himself thinking about her at odd moments throughout his shifts. The afternoon brought its usual steady stream of customers, but Oliver's attention kept drifting to Luna's table near the windows. She worked with a kind of focused intensity that was captivating to watch, occasionally pausing to sip her experimental latte and make additional notes in her journal. As the day cycle wound down and the cafe began to empty of its usual crowd, Luna approached the counter with her empty cup and a small sketch that she had apparently torn from her journal. "I wanted to thank you for creating such an inspiring beverage," she said, handing him the sketch. "This is a preliminary design for one of the pieces in my new series. I thought you might like to see how your flavor story translated into visual concepts." Oliver studied the sketch with growing amazement. Luna had somehow captured the essence of the layered flavors he had created, translating them into swirling patterns of color and form that seemed to move and shift even on the static page. "This is incredible," he said, genuinely awed by her ability to translate one sensory experience into another artistic medium. "You've managed to make flavors visible." "That was exactly what I was hoping to achieve," Luna said, her skin shifting to that warmer green tone that indicated her pleasure with his reaction. "Your experimental latte showed me how different elements can work together to create something completely new." As she prepared to leave for the day, Oliver felt a reluctance to see their conversation end. There was something about Luna's artistic passion and gentle demeanor that made him want to find excuses to extend their interactions beyond the professional boundaries of customer service. "Here's your sketch back," he said, handing her the drawing along with a small container of the experimental beverage mixture. "And I made some extra of the latte base, in case you want to continue exploring flavor inspiration at home." "That's very thoughtful of you," Luna said, reaching for the container. As she did, her fingers brushed against his, creating a moment of contact that seemed to carry more significance than casual interaction should have warranted. "Here you go." "Stunning," Oliver said absently, the endearment slipping out as naturally as if he had been thinking it throughout their entire conversation. The moment the word left his lips, Oliver felt a jolt of awareness at what he had just said. The cafe seemed to go quiet around them, despite the continued background noise of cleaning equipment and departing customers. Luna went completely still, her violet eyes widening as she stared at him with an expression of profound surprise. Her pale green skin began to shift through a spectrum of colors, settling on a luminous golden green that Oliver had never seen before. "What did you just call me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with emotional undertones he couldn't quite identify. Oliver felt his face burning with embarrassment as he realized He had just crossed some kind of invisible boundary between professional courtesy and personal expression. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to be inappropriate. Sometimes I think out loud without realizing it." But Luna wasn't looking offended or uncomfortable. Instead, her expression was shifting to something that looked like wonder mixed with shy delight, her unusual coloring becoming even more pronounced as she continued to stare at him. "In my species' culture," she said softly, her musical voice carrying notes of vulnerability that made Oliver's heart rate accelerate, "aesthetic compliments are considered deeply meaningful. To call someone stunning is to see beauty in them that goes beyond mere physical appearance." Oliver swallowed hard, beginning to understand that what had started as an accidental endearment had become something much more significant. "And how do you feel about that kind of seeing?" Luna stepped closer to him, her golden-green luminescence becoming more pronounced and her violet eyes holding his gaze with an intensity that made the rest of the cafe fade into irrelevance. "Say that again," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and anticipation that made Oliver realize their daily interactions had been building toward this moment without either of them fully acknowledging it. "Stunning," he said softly, watching as her coloring brightened further and her expression filled with the kind of joy that suggested their relationship had just transformed into something neither of them had originally planned, but both of them seemed ready to explore. The hydroponics bay of the Celestial Haven Research Station existed in a state of carefully controlled paradise, its vast chambers filled with growing systems that supported plant life from dozens of different worlds. Artificial sunlight streamed through transparent aluminum panels, creating patterns of warmth and shadow among the towering vertical gardens and specialized growing matrices. The air was thick with humidity and the complex fragrance of flowering plants, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a natural ecosystem than an engineered environment. Ethan Brooks had been working as the station's head botanical engineer for years, long enough to develop an intuitive understanding of how different species plant life could be coaxed to thrive in artificial conditions. At 34, he had originally trained as a terraforming specialist, but he had discovered that he preferred the immediate, tangible results of helping individual plants and small ecosystems flourish rather than the decades-long process of transforming entire planets. The morning had been spent monitoring the delicate balance of atmospheric conditions required to support the bay's most challenging specimens, a collection of rare luminary healing plants whose therapeutic properties required precise combinations of light wavelengths, humidity levels, and soil mineral content. The plants were beautiful in an alien way, their translucent leaves seeming to glow with their own internal light, while their root systems pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. It was while adjusting the light spectrum settings for the luminary section that Ethan became aware of someone entering the hydroponics bay. He looked up from his control panel to see a figure moving gracefully between the plant rows, her attention focused on the various specimens with the kind of careful observation that suggested professional interest rather than casual curiosity. Nova Crystalsong was immediately recognizable even among the diverse population of the research station. Her species, the Resonant, were known for their natural healing abilities and their deep spiritual connection to living things. She stood about 6 feet tall, with skin that seemed to shift between pale pink and soft gold depending on her emotional state and the lighting conditions. Her hair fell in waves of pure white that seemed to have its own subtle luminescence, and her large amber eyes held the kind of gentle wisdom that made her appear both youthful and ancient at the same time. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work," Nova said as she approached his monitoring station, her voice carrying the characteristic harmonic qualities that made resonant speech so soothing to hear. "I was told that you might be able to help me understand the growing requirements for some medicinal plants I'm hoping to cultivate." Ethan felt a pleasant surprise at her request. He had encountered Nova several times during his years on the station, always in professional contexts related to the medical applications of various plant species, but they had never had extended conversations about botanical cultivation techniques. "Not interrupting at all," he replied, gesturing toward the extensive growing systems surrounding them. "What kind of medicinal plants are you interested in working with?" Nova moved closer to examine the nearest growing matrix, her amber eyes studying the complex hydroponic systems with obvious fascination. Traditional resonant healing plants, she explained. My people use certain flowering species in our therapeutic practices, but most of them require very specific environmental conditions that are difficult to replicate in artificial settings. Resonant healing botany is fascinating, Ethan said, his scientific curiosity immediately engaged. Your people's therapeutic plants often have properties that seem to respond to emotional and spiritual states as much as physical conditions. Exactly, Nova said, her skin shifting to a warmer golden tone that Ethan was beginning to recognize as indicating pleasure or excitement. The plants we use for healing don't just treat symptoms, they somehow connect with the patient's entire well-being, addressing underlying imbalances that might not be apparent through conventional medical analysis. As they walked through the hydroponics bay, Ethan found himself increasingly captivated by Nova's knowledge of plant-based healing traditions and her gentle approach to discussing the spiritual aspects of botanical medicine. Most of the researchers he worked with focused purely on the technical and scientific aspects of plant cultivation, but Nova understood the deeper connections between growing things and the beings who depended on them. "This section might interest you," Ethan said, leading her toward an area where he had been experimenting with plants that seemed to respond to electromagnetic fields and other subtle environmental influences. "I've been working with species that appear to be sensitive to non-physical factors." Nova's reaction was immediate and profound. As she moved among the experimental growing systems, her skin began to take on a brighter golden luminescence, and her expression shifted to one of wonder and recognition. "These plants are singing," she said softly, her voice carrying notes of amazement. "I can feel their energy patterns. They're responding to something beyond just light and nutrients." "You can actually sense that?" Ethan asked, genuinely fascinated by her apparent ability to perceive aspects of plant life that his instruments could only measure indirectly. Resonant healing abilities include sensitivity to life energy in all its forms, Nova explained, moving carefully among the plants with her hands extended as if she were feeling for invisible emanations. "These specimens are generating harmonious vibrations that suggest they're not just surviving, but actually thriving in ways that go beyond normal biological functions." For the next hour, they worked together in what quickly became a fascinating collaboration. Nova's empathic sensitivity to plant life combined with Ethan's technical expertise to reveal aspects of botanical cultivation that neither of them could have discovered alone. She could sense when plants were experiencing stress or optimal growth conditions, while he could adjust the artificial environment to support whatever state she detected. "Try increasing the mineral concentration in growing matrix 7, Nova suggested, her hands hovering over a section of experimental seedlings. "They're indicating that they need more grounding elements to support their energy development." Ethan made the adjustments to the hydroponic system, watching his monitoring displays as the plant's biological indicators shifted in response to the changed conditions. "You're right," he said with growing excitement. "Their cellular activity is increasing significantly. The plants are responding to your care as much as the technical modifications," Nova observed, studying his interaction with the growing systems. "You have a natural affinity for nurturing growing things that goes beyond just technical knowledge." As they continued their collaborative work, Ethan became increasingly aware of Nova's presence beside him. Her healing abilities seemed to create a sense of calm and well-being that made even routine botanical tasks feel more meaningful and connected. There was something about her combination of scientific knowledge and spiritual sensitivity that he found both intellectually stimulating and emotionally appealing. "I think we've created optimal growing conditions for this entire section," Nova said finally, stepping back to survey their work with obvious satisfaction. "The plant energy patterns are stronger and more harmonious than they were when we started." "We make an excellent team," Ethan said, genuinely impressed by what they had accomplished together. "Your empathic abilities combined with technical cultivation methods could revolutionize how we approach botanical research." "I would very much like to continue working together," Nova replied, and there was something in her amber eyes that suggested she was interested in more than just professional collaboration. As they prepared to document their experimental results, Ethan found himself reluctant to see their shared work session come to an end. The combination of Nova's gentle wisdom and her obvious passion for plant-based healing had made the afternoon one of the most engaging and rewarding research experiences he had had in years. These results should definitely be shared with the Botanical Research Council, he said, transferring data from his monitoring systems to a portable storage device. What we've discovered about empathic plant cultivation could have applications throughout the sector. The knowledge will be most useful if it's shared openly, Nova agreed, though her tone suggested that the value of their discoveries went beyond mere scientific publication. As she prepared to leave, gathering her notes and preparing to return to her own research responsibilities, Ethan felt a growing certainty that he wanted to find ways to extend their collaboration beyond this single afternoon. I hope we can continue this work together, he said, handing her a copy of their experimental data. Your healing insights combined with botanical engineering could lead to breakthroughs that neither of our fields could achieve independently. I would like that very much, Nova said, accepting the data storage device with a touch that lingered longer than strictly necessary for a simple transfer of research materials. As she turned to leave, Ethan felt an impulse to express his appreciation for both her professional contributions and her personally engaging presence during their afternoon of shared discovery. Here you go, Radiant, he said, offering her a small flowering cutting from one of the plants they had successfully optimized. Together, the endearment slipped out naturally, a spontaneous expression of his growing appreciation for her luminous presence and the way she seemed to bring out the best in both the plants they were nurturing and his own approach to botanical research. The moment the word left his lips, however, Ethan felt a sudden awareness of what he had just said. The hydroponics bay seemed to go quiet around them. Despite the continued background hum of growing systems and environmental controls, Nova went completely still, her amber eyes widening as she stared at him with an expression of profound surprise. Her skin began to shift through a spectrum of colors, settling on a brilliant golden luminescence that was brighter than anything he had seen from her before. What did you call me? She asked, her voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the botanical systems around them. Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment as he realized he had just crossed some invisible boundary between professional courtesy and personal expression. I called you Radiant, he said honestly. I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. Your presence just seems to bring light to everything around you. But Nova wasn't looking offended or uncomfortable. Instead, her expression was shifting to something that looked like amazed delight, her golden luminescence becoming even more pronounced as she continued to stare at him. With growing wonder, in resonant culture, she said softly, her harmonious voice carrying undertones of vulnerability and hope. To call someone radiant is to acknowledge that their life energy enhances and illuminates the world around them. It's one of the most meaningful compliments we can receive. Ethan swallowed hard, beginning to understand that his spontaneous endearment had carried far more significance than he had realized. And how do you feel about that kind of acknowledgement? Nova stepped closer to him, her golden radiance becoming more intense and her amber eyes holding his gaze with an intimacy that made the vast hydroponics bay feel suddenly small and private. Say that again, she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics of anticipation and emotional openness that made Ethan's heart race with possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. Radiant, he said softly, watching as her luminescence brightened further and her expression filled with the kind of joy that suggested their afternoon of collaborative botanical research had become the beginning of something far more significant than either of them had originally planned. The observation deck of Celestial Haven had been transformed for the station's quarterly Unity celebration, its transparent aluminum dome providing a spectacular view of the nebula while holographic displays created the illusion of being suspended among the stars themselves. Soft lighting in dozens of different spectrums accommodated the visual preferences of the station's diverse population, while the air recycling systems had been adjusted to carry the subtle fragrances that different species associated with celebration. Enjoy. Marcus Reed stood near one of the viewing windows, nursing a drink that Zara had recommended, something Corellian that tasted like starlight and summer rain. He was watching the graceful movements of dancers from various species when he felt familiar presence beside him. "The nebula looks particularly beautiful tonight," Zara said, her voice carrying that musical quality that had become one of his favorite sounds in the universe. She was wearing formal attire that seemed to shift color with her movements, complementing her pale blue skin in ways that made her appear even more ethereal than usual. "Almost as beautiful as my favorite botanist," Marcus replied, the endearment coming naturally after weeks of growing closer through their shared work in his workshop and their exploration of each other's cultures. Zara's skin shifted to that deep violet color that he had learned meant she was deeply pleased, and she moved closer to him with the fluid grace that had originally caught his attention. "Your understanding of Corellian emotional expressions has improved considerably," she observed with obvious affection. "I've had an excellent teacher," Marcus said, offering his arm as they watched other couples moving through the traditional Unity dance, a choreographed celebration that had been designed to accommodate the movement patterns of multiple species simultaneously. Across the observation deck, Finn Carter was engaged in animated conversation with Nick Starweaver near the holographic star charts that had been set up as both decoration and educational display. Nix's luminescent skin was glowing softly in the dim lighting, her amber eyes bright with intellectual excitement as she explained the astronomical significance of various stellar formations. To a group of fascinated listeners, the Valorian civilization actually used these star patterns as the basis for their temporal linguistic system, Nix was saying, her musical voice carrying easily across the space. Each constellation represented different grammatical structures that changed meaning based on their position in the sky. Finn watched her with obvious admiration, both for her scholarly expertise and for the elegant way she communicated complex ideas to beings from vastly different educational backgrounds. When the group eventually dispersed to explore other aspects of the celebration, he moved closer to her. "You have a gift for making ancient knowledge accessible to everyone," he said, genuinely impressed by her teaching abilities. "Most xenolinguists struggle to explain their research to other specialists, let alone to general audiences. Knowledge is meant to be shared," Nix replied, her amber eyes focusing on him with the kind of intensity that had become familiar during their late-night research sessions. "Though I must admit, I find it most rewarding to share discoveries with someone who truly appreciates their significance." "Beautiful and brilliant," Finn said softly, using the endearment that had become meaningful between them, "a combination that never fails to amaze me." Nix's luminescence brightened at his words, and she reached out to touch his hand in the gesture of emotional connection that her species used to indicate deep affection. Meanwhile, Oliver Hayes was working behind the temporary beverage station that had been set up for the celebration, creating custom drinks for partygoers who wanted something special for the evening's festivities. His movements